Hashtag the last bookshop on Willow Street. Hashtag part 1. The inheritance. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a postal worker who looked apologetic about handing over yet another piece of official correspondence. Margot Chen had been receiving a lot of those lately: bills, final notices, collection agency warnings. She almost didn't open this one, assuming it was another reminder of debts she couldn't pay, obligations she couldn't meet. But something about the thick cream envelope, the old-fashioned wax seal on the back, made her pause. She set down her coffee, instant, because she couldn't afford anything else, and carefully broke the seal. The letter inside was written in elegant handwriting on heavy paper that felt expensive between her fingers. Margot read it once, then twice, then a third time, certain she must be misunderstanding. Dear Ms. Chen, it is my duty to inform you that your great-aunt, Josephine Chen, passed away peacefully in her sleep on February 28th. As her sole surviving relative, you are the beneficiary of her estate. The estate consists primarily of a property located at 47 Willow Street in the town of Millbrook, Vermont, which has operated as the Willow Street Bookshop for the past 47 years. Additionally, there is a small savings account and the contents of the shop itself. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of your inheritance and to arrange for the transfer of property. My condolences on your loss. Sincerely, Howard Pemberton, attorney at law. Margot sat down heavily on her apartment's only chair. She'd sold the other one last month to make rent. Great Aunt Josephine. She had vague memories of the woman from childhood. A tall, thin figure with steel gray hair always twisted into a bun, spectacles on a chain around her neck, a constant smell of old books and lavender. Margot's mother had taken her to visit once or twice when she was very young, before the family had drifted apart in the way families do. She hadn't known Josephine was still alive. She certainly hadn't expected to inherit anything from her. A bookshop in Vermont. Margot looked around her studio apartment in Queens. It was small, dark, and currently 2 months behind on rent. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors' every argument, every footstep, every late-night television program. She had moved to New York 5 years ago with dreams of becoming a literary agent, of working with authors and shaping stories that would change the world. Instead, she had spent 5 years as an assistant to an assistant at a mid-sized agency, fetching coffee and making photocopies and watching her student loans accumulate interest while her dreams withered. 3 months ago, she'd been laid off in a round of restructuring. Her unemployment was running out. Her savings were gone. She had been seriously considering moving back in with her parents in California, a prospect that filled her with equal parts relief and shame. And now an inheritance, a bookshop. Margot pulled out her laptop, old, with a cracked screen, but still functional, and searched for Millbrook, Vermont. The town appeared on her screen. Population 3,247, located in the Green Mountains, known for its covered bridges and fall foliage. The kind of picture-perfect New England town that existed on postcards and in Hallmark movies. She searched for the bookshop itself but found almost nothing. Just a listing in an old directory and a few mentions in local newspaper archives from years ago. She looked at the letter again. Property, a bookshop, and she noted, reading more carefully, a small savings account. Maybe, just maybe, enough to pay her debts and start over. Margot made the call to Howard Pemberton that afternoon. 3 weeks later, she was driving north in a rental car packed with everything she owned, which wasn't much. Clothes, books, her laptop, a few photographs. She had given notice on her apartment, said goodbye to the few friends who still returned her calls, and pointed her car toward Vermont. The drive took about 5 hours. the landscape gradually transforming from urban sprawl to suburbs to rural countryside. By the time Margot crossed into Vermont, the world had become all rolling hills and forests, small farms and stone walls that looked like they'd been standing for centuries. Snow still lingered in the shadowed places, though spring was definitely arriving. She could see crocuses pushing through the earth, and the trees were beginning to bud. Millbrook announced itself with a hand-painted wooden sign. "Welcome to Millbrook, Vermont, founded 1791. A little town with a big heart." Margot drove slowly down Main Street, taking in the scene. It was exactly as picture-perfect as she'd feared. A white church with a tall steeple, a general store, a diner called Betty's, a post office, a few other small businesses. People on the sidewalks waved at her car as she passed, and she waved back uncertainly. The friendliness was almost unnerving after years in New York, where making eye contact with strangers was considered risky behavior. Here, everyone seemed to know everyone else. An elderly man tipped his hat to her. A woman with a stroller called out, "Welcome," as if she somehow knew Margot was new in town. Two teenagers sitting on a bench outside the general store looked up from their phones long enough to offer friendly smiles. Willow Street turned out to be 2 blocks off Main Street, a quiet residential road lined with large old trees and Victorian houses in varying states of repair. Number 47 was near the end of the street, set back slightly from the road behind a low stone wall and a garden that had clearly once been beautiful but was now overgrown. The building itself was a 2-story structure painted pale blue with white trim. Large display windows flanked a central door, and a faded sign above read "The Willow Street Bookshop" in gold letters. Above the shop, Margot could see windows with lace curtains, the apartment where Josephine had lived, presumably. Margot parked in the small gravel lot beside the building and sat for a moment, engine idling, looking at her inheritance. It needed work. She could see peeling paint, cracked window panes, roof tiles that were missing or askew. The front steps sagged slightly in the middle. Weeds had pushed through the cracks in the walkway, but there was something charming about it too, something that spoke of history and stories and a slower pace of life. She turned off the engine and got out. The air smelled different here, cleaner, greener, with hints of wood smoke and earth and something floral she couldn't identify. It was quiet except for birdsong and the distant sound of a dog barking and wind rustling through the new leaves. No sirens, no traffic, no chaos of human voices. The silence was almost unsettling after 5 years of New York's constant noise. The front door had a heavy old lock, and Margot fumbled with the key Howard Pemberton had sent her. The mechanism was stiff from disuse, and for a moment she worried it wouldn't turn at all. But finally, with a satisfying click that echoed in the quiet street, the lock gave way and she pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Old paper, dust, wood polish, and underneath it all, a faint trace of lavender. Margot stepped inside and let her eyes adjust to the dimness. The interior was larger than it looked from outside, with tall shelves stretching from floor to ceiling on every wall. Books everywhere, thousands of them, tens of thousands maybe, packed into every available space. Fiction and nonfiction, hardcovers and paperbacks, new releases and ancient volumes with cracked leather bindings. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through the dirty windows. A fine layer of dust covered everything, the books, the counter, the wooden floor. But beneath the neglect, Margot could see the bones of something wonderful. The shelves were solid oak, beautifully crafted. The tin ceiling had decorative patterns pressed into it. The floor was wide plank hardwood, scarred and worn but still handsome. In the center of the shop was a counter with an old-fashioned cash register, the kind you rarely saw anymore outside of antique stores. It was brass, heavy and ornate, with numbers that popped up in little windows when you pressed the keys. Behind the counter, A doorway led to what looked like a back room. To the left, a narrow staircase climbed to the second floor. Margot walked slowly through the shop, running her fingers along the spines of books, reading titles at random. The organization system seemed to be something only Josephine had understood. Books were shelved not by genre or author, but by some mysterious method that placed Virginia Woolf next to a book about beekeeping, which sat beside a collection of Japanese poetry, which neighbored a thriller by John Grisham. Despite the dust and the disorder, there was something magical about the space. Margot had always loved bookstores, the promise of stories waiting to be discovered, of worlds contained between covers, of the quiet democracy of shelves where literary masterpieces stood shoulder to shoulder with pulp paperbacks. As a child, she had spent hours in bookstores and libraries, losing herself between pages while the real world carried on without her. She pulled a book at random from the shelf, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. It was an old edition with a cloth cover and gilt lettering that had mostly worn away. When she opened it, she found an inscription on the flyleaf in the same elegant handwriting as the letter. To Josephine, on your 12th birthday, may you always find magic in stories. With love, Mother. Margot's throat tightened. She carefully replaced the book and continued her exploration. The back room proved to be a combination office and storage area, with more books stacked in boxes, a desk buried under paperwork, and filing cabinets that looked like they dated from the 1950s. There was also a small bathroom, which Margot was relieved to find, though the fixtures definitely needed updating. She made her way upstairs, where she found Josephine's apartment. It was modest but comfortable. A small kitchen with appliances that were probably older than Margot, a living room lined with more bookshelves, a bedroom with an iron-framed bed and a handmade quilt, and a bathroom that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1970. Everything was neat and clean, as if Josephine had just stepped out for a moment and would be back soon. But of course, she wouldn't be back. She was gone, and Margot was here in her place, inheriting not just a building but a life, a legacy, a responsibility she hadn't asked for and wasn't sure she wanted. Margot set her bags down and walked to the window. From here, she could see down Willow Street, see the tops of the trees beginning to leaf out, see the mountains in the distance still wearing caps of snow. It was beautiful and peaceful and utterly foreign to everything she had known for the past 5 years. She thought about her apartment in Queens, about the literary agency where she'd wasted her 20s, about the life she'd been living or enduring. She thought about the letter of rejection from her dream job that had arrived just before she was laid off. She thought about her parents' disappointed faces when she told them she'd lost her position. She thought about her ex-boyfriend who had broken up with her 6 months ago because, "You're not going anywhere, Margot, and I can't wait around forever." And then she thought about this bookshop, this town, this unexpected inheritance. What if she stayed? What if she tried to make this work? The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. Margot spent the rest of that day unpacking and exploring. She found sheets in a linen closet and made up the bed. She discovered that the kitchen was stocked with basic supplies: flour, sugar, tea, coffee, all neatly labeled with dates. Josephine had been methodical, organized, prepared. She found a note taped to the refrigerator in that same elegant handwriting. "In case of emergency, call Betty Morrison at the diner. She has an extra key and knows where everything is." As evening fell, Margot made herself a simple dinner from the groceries she'd bought on her way: bread, cheese, fruit, wine, and ate it standing at the kitchen window, watching the last light fade from the sky. When full darkness fell, she was startled by how complete it was. In New York, there was always light: street lamps, headlights, the glow of windows in countless buildings. Here, there was nothing but the stars, more numerous and brilliant than she had ever seen them. She washed her dishes in the old porcelain sink, dried them with a dish towel that had embroidered flowers on it, and then found herself drawn back downstairs to the shop. She turned on the lights, a series of old brass fixtures that cast a warm, golden glow, and walked among the shelves, pulling books at random, reading opening lines, skimming passages. It was while browsing that she discovered Josephine's system wasn't random after all. The books were organized by feeling, by theme, by the invisible threads that connected one story to another. A cookbook about French cuisine sat next to A Year in Provence by Peter Mayle, which was shelved beside The Little Paris Bookshop by Nina George, which neighbored a mystery set in Marseille. Each book spoke to the others, created a conversation, told a larger story. Once Margot started to see the pattern, it was like learning a new language, or perhaps remembering an old one, the language of stories, of connections, of the way books could illuminate each other like candles in darkness. She lost track of time, wandering through the shop, discovering new sections, understanding more of Josephine's logic. There was a corner dedicated to books about gardens and growing things, next to memoirs of homesteading, next to novels about returning to the land. Another section held adventure stories next to travel guides, next to anthropological studies of distant cultures. Everywhere she looked, Margot found evidence of a brilliant, curious mind at work, a mind that saw connections others might miss. When she finally climbed the stairs back to the apartment, it was past midnight. She fell into bed exhausted and slept deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in months. Part 2, Meeting the Town. The next morning, Margot woke early to bright sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. She made coffee in Josephine's old percolator. It took some figuring out, but the result was surprisingly good, and carried her mug downstairs to the shop. In daylight, the space looked even more overwhelming. There was so much to do: cleaning, organizing, repairs. She needed to figure out the inventory, understand what books she had, decide what to keep and what to sell. She needed to assess the building's condition, get quotes for repairs, figure out if she could afford to fix what needed fixing. But first, she needed information. And according to Josephine's note, Betty Morrison at the diner was the person to talk to. Margot showered in the ancient bathroom, dressed in jeans and a sweater, and walked the 2 blocks to Main Street. The morning was crisp and clear, the air carrying the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. People were out and about. A woman sweeping the sidewalk in front of the general store, a man walking a golden retriever, an elderly couple holding hands as they strolled past the church. Several people nodded at Margot as she passed, and one woman, middle-aged with kind eyes and wild curly hair, actually stopped her. "You must be Josephine's great niece. I heard you'd arrived."
I'm Susan Blackwell.
"I run the library. Welcome to Millbrook." "Thank you," Margot said, somewhat taken aback by the warm greeting.
I'm Margot Chen.
"We all loved Josephine," Susan continued. "The bookshop was such a treasure. It broke our hearts when she got too ill to keep it open. Are you planning to reopen it?" Margot hesitated. "I'm not sure yet. I'm still figuring everything out." "Well, if you do decide to reopen, you'll have plenty of support. This town needs a bookshop. The nearest one is 45 minutes away now." Susan squeezed Margot's arm. "Come by the library sometime. I'd love to chat more. And if you need any help with the shop, just ask. We're all eager to pitch in." Betty's diner was exactly what Margot expected. Red vinyl booths, a long counter with chrome-edged stools, black and white tile floor, and the smell of coffee and bacon filling the air. A bell jangled when she pushed through the door, and every head in the place turned to look at her. Margot felt a flutter of anxiety. All these strangers, all these eyes on her. But then a woman behind the counter, 50-ish with dyed red hair and a wide smile, called out, "You must be Margot. Come on in, honey. Coffee?" Yes, please, Margot said gratefully, sliding onto a stool at the counter. The woman poured coffee into a heavy ceramic mug and set it in front of Margot along with cream and sugar.
I'm Betty Morrison.
I was a good friend of your aunt's. We had breakfast together every Sunday for 15 years. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you, Margot said. Though I feel like I should apologize. I didn't really know her. My mother and she had a falling out years ago. I only met her a few times when I was very young. Josephine mentioned that, Betty said kindly. Family rifts are a sad thing, but she spoke about you sometimes, wondered how you were doing. She would have been so pleased to know you'd inherited the shop. Can I ask, what was she like? Really like? I mean, Betty leaned against the counter, her expression growing thoughtful. Brilliant, eccentric, stubborn as hell, pardon my language. She had very particular ideas about everything, how books should be organized, how tea should be brewed, how a person should live their life. She didn't suffer fools, but she was incredibly generous to anyone she decided deserved her help. Did she have many friends? Some. She was selective, but the people she let in deep. She was lonely, I think, especially after she got older and her health started failing. The shop was her whole life. When she couldn't keep it open anymore, something went out of her. Betty's eyes grew misty. She held on as long as she could, but in the end, I think she was ready to go. They talked for another hour, Betty telling stories about Josephine, about the bookshop's history, about the town. Margot learned that Josephine had opened the shop in 1976, after her husband, a professor of English literature, had died unexpectedly of a heart attack. The shop had been her salvation, a way to channel her grief into something productive. For years, it had thrived, becoming a gathering place for readers and writers, hosting book clubs and author events, serving as a kind of cultural center for the small town. But in recent years, business had declined. The rise of online retailers, the proliferation of ebooks, the changing reading habits of younger generations, all had taken their toll. Josephine had refused to adapt, had clung to her old ways, and gradually the customers had dwindled. By the end, she was keeping the shop open more out of stubbornness than sound business sense. The building needs work, Betty said bluntly. The roof leaks. The plumbing is questionable. The whole place needs updating. But the bones are good, and the location is perfect. If you wanted to reopen it, if you were willing to modernize a bit while keeping what made it special, I think you could make it work. I don't know anything about running a bookshop, Margot admitted. But you love books, don't you? I can see it in your eyes when you talk about them. That's more important than business experience. The rest you can learn. By the time Margot left the diner, her head was spinning with information and possibilities. She walked back to Willow Street slowly, looking at the town with new eyes. It was small, yes, and quiet, but it wasn't sleepy. People were going about their business with purpose. The general store had customers coming and going. The post office was busy. She passed a yoga studio, a pottery shop, a real estate office. This was a living town, not a dying one. Back at the bookshop, Margot spent the afternoon taking detailed inventory. She found a ledger in Josephine's desk, the old-fashioned kind with columns for recording stock and sales, and was amazed to discover that her great-aunt had maintained meticulous records right up until the shop closed. Every book was logged, with purchase price, sale price, and date acquired. Every customer transaction was recorded. It was a treasure trove of information. As she worked her way through the shop, Margot began to understand the full scope of what she had inherited. There were first editions that might be quite valuable, a pristine copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, several Hemingway novels, a complete set of Faulkner. There were signed copies from author events, Alice Walker, Margaret Atwood, Toni Morrison. There were rare books about Vermont history, about the Civil War, about sailing ships and mountain climbing, and 1,000 other topics. There were also thousands of ordinary books, paperback mysteries and romances, popular fiction from decades past, self-help books and cookbooks and how-to manuals. Some were worth keeping. Many should probably be donated or recycled. It would take weeks to sort through everything. Late in the afternoon, as Margot was standing on a stepladder trying to reach a high shelf, someone knocked on the shop door. She climbed down carefully and went to answer it, expecting another friendly neighbor. Instead, she found a man about her age. Early 30s, maybe, with dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and an armload of books. "I'm so sorry to bother you," he said quickly. "I know the shop is closed, but I heard Josephine's great-niece had arrived, and I wanted to return these. I borrowed them months ago before she passed. I've been holding on to them, not sure what to do. I didn't want to keep them, but I couldn't just leave them on the doorstep." "Come in," Margot said, stepping back. "Please." The man entered, looking around the familiar space with obvious nostalgia. "It hasn't changed," he said softly. "I half expected everything to be different, but it's all exactly as I remember." "Were you a regular customer?" Margot asked. "More than that. I was one of Josephine's projects." He set the books on the counter carefully. "I'm Daniel Mercer. I teach English at the high school. When I first moved back to Millbrook 8 years ago, I was in a bad place. My father had just been diagnosed with cancer. I'd left a teaching position I loved in Boston to come home and help. I was angry and lost. Josephine, she saw that. She started recommending books, specific books that somehow always said exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. She saved me in a way." Margot looked at the books he brought. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Books about loss and meaning and finding purpose in suffering. "She had a gift for that," Daniel continued, "for knowing what people needed, what book would speak to them. She wasn't just selling books. She was..." He paused, searching for words. "She was prescribing them like medicine. Does that sound crazy?" "Not at all," Margot said. "I'm beginning to understand that about her. She saw connections other people didn't see." "Are you going to reopen the shop?" Daniel asked hopefully. "I don't know yet. Maybe. Probably. I'm still figuring everything out. I hope you do. This town needs it. The kids I teach, they need it. A place where books are valued, where reading is celebrated, where you can discover something new that matters more than people realize." After Daniel left, Margot sat at Josephine's desk and thought about what he'd said. She thought about Betty's stories, about Susan Blackwell's enthusiasm, about the way people kept saying, "We need the bookshop." She thought about her own need for meaning, for purpose, for something that mattered. She opened her laptop and began making notes. If she was going to do this, if she was going to try to bring the bookshop back to life, she needed a plan. ## part 3, the decision. Over the next week, Margot threw herself into understanding the bookshop's finances and condition. She met with Howard Pemberton, Josephine's lawyer, who walked her through the details of her inheritance with patience and thoroughness. The savings account held $18,000. Not a fortune, but more than Margot had expected. The building was fully paid off, which meant no mortgage, just property taxes and insurance. Josephine had also paid for a year of insurance in advance, giving Margot some breathing room. But the building needed work. Margot got quotes from local contractors. The roof needed repairs, $8,000. The plumbing needed updating, $6,000. The electrical system should be inspected and possibly upgraded for $1,000 minimum. And that was just the essential work. If she wanted to do cosmetic improvements, painting, refinishing floors, updating fixtures. She could easily spend another 10,000. The numbers were daunting. Even if she used all of Josephine's savings, she'd still need more money. Howard suggested applying for a small business loan and put her in touch with a banker in the next town over who specialized in helping local businesses. Margot spent 3 days putting together a business plan. She researched what other successful independent bookshops were doing, studied their websites and social media, read articles about the surprising resilience of indie bookstores in the age of Amazon. She learned that bookshops that thrived were those that became community gathering places, that hosted events, that offered experiences you couldn't get online. She made lists of what she could offer, carefully curated selection, not just bestsellers, knowledgeable recommendations, author events and book clubs, coffee and refreshments, comfortable seating and a welcoming atmosphere, local author showcase, children's story time, writing workshops, special orders and gift wrapping, online presence and mail order for customers who couldn't come in person. It was ambitious. It would require money and time and energy and risk. But the more Margot worked on the plan, the more excited she became. This could work. This could actually work. The banker, a woman named Sandra Liu, was encouraging. Independent bookstores are making a comeback, she told Margot during their meeting. People are rediscovering the value of local businesses, of expert curation, of actually holding a physical book. If you're willing to work hard and think creatively, I think you have a real chance. Sandra approved a loan of $30,000, enough to cover the essential repairs and some of the improvements. Combined with Josephine's savings and Margot's own meager resources, it would be tight but doable. There was just one problem. Margot was terrified. She had never run a business. She had never even managed people. Her entire professional experience consisted of being an assistant, of taking orders rather than giving them, of supporting other people's dreams rather than pursuing her own. What made her think she could do this? Late one night, unable to sleep, Margot went downstairs to the shop and turned on a single lamp. She pulled books at random from the shelves and read passages, seeking what? Guidance? Permission? Courage? She found herself in what she'd started thinking of as Josephine's transformation section. Books about people who had changed their lives, who had taken risks, who had failed and tried again. She pulled down Wild by Cheryl Strayed and read about a woman who had hiked the Pacific Crest Trail to put her life back together. She read Educated by Tara Westover, about escaping one life and building another. She read The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes, about overcoming fear and embracing possibility. And then she found Josephine's journals. They were in a drawer in the desk, a dozen leather-bound volumes spanning decades. Margot hesitated. These were private, personal. But Josephine had left them here, hadn't destroyed them. Maybe she had wanted them to be found. Margot opened the first journal, dated 1976. The opening entry was written in April, just a month after Josephine's husband had died. Asterisk, today I signed the lease on the building on Willow Street. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. A middle-aged widow with no business experience opening a bookshop in a small town. My brother told me I should sell Robert's books, not try to build a business around them. My sister suggested I move to Florida, find a retirement community, live a quiet life. Asterisk, but I can't do that. I can't give up, can't stop, can't fade away into comfortable silence. Robert loved books more than anything except me. He believed stories could change lives, could open minds, could create understanding across all the boundaries that divide us. This shop will be my memorial to him, my way of keeping his passion alive. Asterisk.
I'm terrified.
I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to try anyway. Asterisk. Margot read on, following Josephine's journey through those early months. The The mistakes she made, the lessons she learned, the slow building of a customer base. The journal entries were full of doubt and fear, but also determination and joy. Josephine had been scared too. She had failed plenty of times, ordered books nobody wanted, misjudged what customers would buy, made countless errors. But she had persisted. She had learned. She had built something remarkable. Margot read through the night, moving through the journals chronologically, watching Josephine's confidence grow, seeing the shop transform from a desperate gamble into a beloved institution. She read about customers who became friends, about books that found their perfect readers, about the deep satisfaction of creating something meaningful. She also read about the loneliness, the financial struggles, the times Josephine had almost given up. It wasn't all roses and success. There were years when the shop barely broke even, winters when hardly anyone came in, moments when Josephine questioned everything. But always, she came back to the same truth. The shop mattered. It served a purpose beyond profit. It was worth the sacrifice. The last journal ended just 3 months before Josephine died. The handwriting was shakier, the entries shorter, but the passion remained. Asterisk, I'm running out of time. I can feel it in my bones, in the way my breath comes shorter, in the fatigue that never fully lifts. The shop is closed now. I don't have the strength to keep it open, and it breaks my heart. Asterisk. Asterisk, I wonder what will happen to this place when I'm gone. Will someone else see its value? Will they understand what I was trying to build here? Or will it be sold to developers, turned into condos or offices, all these books scattered and lost? Asterisk. Asterisk, I wish I had someone to pass it on to, someone who would love it as I have. But I'm alone, and soon I'll be gone. And all I can do is hope that somehow, some way, the story continues. Asterisk. Margot closed the journal with tears streaming down her face. The story would continue. She would make sure of it. The next morning, she called the contractors and gave them the go-ahead to start work. She called Sandra Liu and accepted the loan. She called Howard Pemberton and told him she was staying. She was reopening the shop. She was all in. And then she called her parents in California. Mom, it's Margot. I have something to tell you. ## Part 4 Rebuilding. The work began in earnest. Contractors arrived with trucks and tools, tearing off old roof shingles, examining joists and rafters, replacing rotten wood. Plumbers worked on updating pipes and fixtures. Electricians rewired outlets and installed new breaker boxes. The shop became a chaos of sawdust and noise and workers calling to each other. Margot worked alongside them, doing what she could. She painted walls, refinished the wooden counter, cleaned windows until they sparkled. She sorted through thousands of books, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to try to sell to collectors. She created a system for organizing the inventory, not abandoning Josephine's associative method, but adding clear signage and logical sections so customers could find things. She also began meeting more of the town. Jim Morrison, no relation to the singer, he joked, was the contractor doing most of the work. He was in his 50s, with weathered hands and a gentle manner, and he had loved Josephine. She was something special, he told Margot as they worked together to strip old wallpaper from one wall. My daughter Sarah went through a rough patch in high school. Bullying, depression, the works. Josephine seemed to sense it somehow. She started setting books aside for Sarah. Books about girls who survived hard things, who found their strength. Sarah would come in every week to see what Josephine had picked out for her. Those books, they gave her hope when we couldn't. She's in college now, studying psychology, wants to be a counselor. She says it's because of the books Josephine shared with her. Stories like this emerged constantly as Margot worked on the shop. The postal worker, Marcus, told her how Josephine had encouraged his love of poetry, and had special-ordered volumes of Langston Hughes and Rita Dove and Ocean Vuong for him. Susan Blackwell from the library reminisced about the reading group Josephine had hosted for years, how it had become a lifeline for people in the town, especially during long winters. Even Betty from the diner had her story. "I was going through a divorce 20 years ago," she confided to Margot over coffee one morning. "Felt like my world was ending." Josephine kept bringing me books. Not romance novels or happy stories, but books about women who survived, who built new lives after everything fell apart. And Tyler, Barbara Kingsolver, Jeanette Winterson. Those books showed me I wasn't alone, that other women had been where I was and had come through it. I don't know if I would have made it without them. Margot began to understand that Josephine hadn't just run a bookshop. She had been a kind of therapist, a guide, a guardian of stories who understood their healing power. The shop had been her way of caring for people, of helping them through their struggles without being intrusive or preachy. She had let the books do the work. Could Margot do the same? She didn't have Josephine's decades of experience, her encyclopedic knowledge of literature, her intuitive sense of what people needed. But she had something else. Fresh eyes, new energy, and a desperate need to make this work. During these weeks of renovation, Margot also started building an online presence for the shop. She created a website, simple but attractive, with photos of the shop, a blog about books, and an online ordering system. She set up Instagram and Facebook accounts, posting pictures of the renovation progress, sharing book recommendations, engaging with potential customers. To her surprise, people responded. Locals who remembered the shop shared their memories. Former customers who had moved away expressed excitement about its reopening. Book lovers from around the state followed the accounts, interested in this story of a bookshop being brought back to life. One evening, as Margot was updating the website with a post about Josephine's organizational system, Daniel Mercer stopped by. She hadn't seen him since that first day, though she'd thought about him more than once. "I've been following your progress online," he said, looking around at the transformed space. "It's incredible what you've done." The shop was indeed transformed. The walls were now painted a warm cream color. The wooden floor had been sanded and refinished to a beautiful honey glow. The tin ceiling had been cleaned and polished. New lighting fixtures, vintage style but with modern LED bulbs, cast warm light throughout. The front windows had been repaired and cleaned, and Margot had started creating displays in them. "It's getting there," Margot said, feeling proud but also overwhelmed. There was still so much to do before she could open. "Want some coffee?"
Primer just brau apot.
They sat in the reading nook Margot had created, two comfortable armchairs arranged near a floor lamp with a small table between them. The chairs were secondhand, found at an estate sale, but they were perfect, deep and soft and inviting. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Daniel said after they'd settled with their coffee. "I run a creative writing club at the high school. We meet Thursday afternoons. I was wondering if you'd be interested in hosting us here. Maybe once a month? The kids could share their work, and being in a real bookshop might inspire them." Margot felt a flutter of excitement. This was exactly the kind of community engagement she wanted. "I'd love that. Absolutely. When would you want to start? Maybe wait until after you officially reopen? Give yourself time to get established. But then, if you're still interested, we could plan our first event here." They talked for over an hour, discussing books and teaching and the challenges of running a small business in a small town. Daniel told her about his students, about the ones who loved reading and the ones he was trying to reach. Margot told him about her time in New York, about her failed career in publishing, about the strange path that had led her here. "It doesn't sound like a failure to me," Daniel said thoughtfully. "It sounds like you were on the wrong path, and now you've found the right one." I hope so. I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up. Josephine was terrified too, you know? She told me once that she spent the first 5 years convinced she'd fail, that the shop would go under and she'd lose everything. But fear didn't stop her. It just made her work harder, pay more attention, care more deeply. After Daniel left, Margot sat alone in the quiet shop and felt something shift inside her. She wasn't alone in this. She had the town behind her, people who wanted her to succeed, who needed the bookshop to thrive. That wasn't just pressure, it was also support, encouragement, a safety net of sorts. She could do this. She would do this. The renovation took 6 weeks total. By mid-May, the work was finished. The shop looked beautiful, respectful of its history, but fresh and inviting. Margot had kept Josephine's organizational system, but made it more accessible, with hand-painted signs directing customers to different sections. She had created several distinct areas: a children's corner with low shelves and a colorful rug, a fiction section organized by mood and theme rather than alphabetically, a non-fiction area with comfortable seating for browsing, and a small coffee bar near the entrance. The coffee bar was Margot's own addition, something Josephine had never had. Betty had connected her with her nephew Noah, who roasted coffee beans in a barn on his property outside town. Noah agreed to supply the shop with fresh beans and taught Margot how to make a proper cup of coffee. The arrangement was simple. Margot would serve his coffee and promote his roasting business, and he'd give her wholesale prices and help train her on the espresso machine she'd bought secondhand. Margot also hired her first employee. Mia Reynolds was 17, quiet and bookish, with purple-streaked hair and a passion for fantasy novels. She came in asking about a job, explaining that she needed to save money for college and loved books more than anything. Margot hired her on the spot, charmed by her enthusiasm and impressed by her knowledge of young adult literature. "I can work after school and on weekends," Mia said eagerly. "And I'm good with social media. I could help with that if you want. And I have ideas for window displays that would appeal to teenagers." With Mia's help, Margot prepared for the grand reopening. They organized the inventory, set up the point-of-sale system Margot had invested in, practiced making coffee drinks, and planned the opening day event. Margot reached out to local authors, inviting them to be part of the celebration. She contacted the local newspaper, which agreed to run a feature story. She put up flyers around town and posted daily updates on social media. The reopening was scheduled for the first Saturday in June. As the day approached, Margot swung between excitement and terror. What if nobody came? What if she'd poured all this money and effort into something that was already doomed? What if she failed just like she'd failed in New York? The night before the opening, Margot couldn't sleep. She went downstairs to the shop at 2 in the morning and just walked among the shelves, running her hands over the books, breathing in the smell of paper and coffee and wood polish. She thought about Josephine, about all the hopes and fears that had filled this space over the years. She thought about the stories contained in these books, thousands of voices speaking across time and distance. And she thought about her own story, how it had led her here, to this moment, to this place. The failures and disappointments that had seemed like endings were actually just plot twists, redirecting her toward where she was meant to be. She pulled a book from the shelf, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, one of Josephine's favorites based on the number of times she'd mentioned it in her journals. Margot opened it to a random page and read, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." What was essential here wasn't the building or the inventory or even the books themselves. It was the connection, the community, the way stories could bring people together and help them see themselves and each other more clearly. Margot closed the book and put it back on the shelf. She would open the doors tomorrow and see what happened. She had done everything she could to prepare. The rest was up to the universe, to fate, to whatever forces guided such things. She climbed back upstairs and finally fell asleep, dreaming of books with wings, flying off the shelves to find their readers. Hashtag part 5. Opening day and beyond. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm, perfect June weather. Margot woke early, too nervous to sleep longer, and spent the morning making final preparations. She arranged flowers in vases throughout the shop, wildflowers from a farm stand, simple and cheerful. She set out the cookies Betty had helped her bake the day before. She checked and rechecked the coffee setup, the cash register, the credit card reader. She changed her outfit 3 times before settling on a simple dress and cardigan, with comfortable shoes suitable for standing all day. Mia arrived at 8, an hour before opening, bouncing with excitement. "I invited everyone I know," she said. "All my friends from school, my parents, my aunt and uncle. I posted about it like 50 times on Instagram." At 8:45, Margot and Mia stood by the front door, looking out at the street. To Margot's amazement and delight, there were already people waiting. 15, 20, maybe 30 people, chatting and laughing on the sidewalk, waiting for the shop to open. At exactly 9 o'clock, Margot unlocked the door and stepped aside as people streamed in. What followed was a blur of activity. Customers browsing the shelves, exclaiming over books they remembered, discovering new titles. People ordering coffee, complimenting the renovations, sharing memories of the old shop. Sales ringing up steadily. 1 book, 2 books, armfuls of books. Betty came early, bringing more cookies and hugs and encouragement. Susan Blackwell from the library brought her book club members. Jim Morrison came with his daughter Sarah, home from college for the summer, who thanked Margot tearfully for reopening the shop. Daniel arrived mid-morning with several of his students, introducing them to Margot and watching with obvious pride as they explored the shelves. Marcus, the postal worker, bought a stack of poetry collections. Noah, the coffee roaster, stopped by to make sure the espresso machine was working properly and stayed to chat with customers about the coffee. Strangers came too, people Margot had never met, drawn by the social media posts or the newspaper article or word of mouth. The local authors Margot had invited set up a table and signed books, drawing crowds of interested readers. A woman who wrote mysteries set in Vermont shared stories about her research. A man who wrote historical fiction about the Civil War discussed his latest novel. A poet read several pieces about the Green Mountains, her words painting pictures of the landscape everyone in the room loved. By noon, Margot had sold over 100 books. By 3, over 200. By the time she locked the door at 7 that evening, exhausted and exhilarated, she had sold nearly 300 books and served countless cups of coffee. The cash register was full, and her credit card reader had processed dozens of transactions. More importantly, the shop had been full of life all day. People talking and laughing, browsing and reading, connecting with each other over their love of books. Margot had watched conversations spark between strangers, seen friendships form, observed the way the shop brought people together. This was what Josephine had created. This was what Margot had brought back to life. After closing, Daniel stayed to help clean up. They worked together in companionable silence, wiping down surfaces, straightening shelves, preparing for tomorrow. "You did it," Daniel said finally, looking at her with admiration. "You really did it." Margot felt tears threatening. "We did it. The whole town did it. I couldn't have done this alone. But you were brave enough to try. That's what matters." That night, Margot climbed the stairs to her apartment, floating on a cloud of joy and relief and satisfaction. She had done it. The shop was open, it was successful, it had a future. She had honored Josephine's legacy while making it her own. She had found a place in this town, a role, a purpose. She was home. Hashtag part 6. The rhythm of the shop. The weeks following the grand reopening settled into a rhythm. Margot opened the shop at 9 each morning and closed at 7 in the evening, except Sundays when she opened at noon. The days varied, some busy, some quiet, but there was always something happening. Regulars emerged quickly. Mrs. Patterson, a woman in her 80s with silver hair and a walker, came in every Tuesday morning for her mystery fix, as she called it. Margot learned to set aside new cozy mysteries for her, and they would spend 20 minutes discussing plots and characters before Mrs. Patterson made her selections. David Chen, no relation, though they joked about a possible distant connection, stopped by every Wednesday after work. He was a software engineer who worked remotely, and he gravitated toward literary fiction, particularly stories about immigration and identity. Margot started special ordering books by Asian American authors, and David became one of her best customers. A group of mothers with young children adopted the Saturday morning story time that Margot had started. She would sit in the children's corner with a pile of picture books, reading aloud to wide-eyed kids while their parents browsed nearby. Some weeks she had 3 or 4 children, other weeks a dozen. The kids adored the ritual, often bringing their own books from home to share. The book clubs began meeting at the shop. The literary fiction group that Margot had started met monthly, and gradually other groups formed. A sci-fi and fantasy club, a memoir reading group, a classics club working through the Western canon, a young adult book club for teenagers. Margot provided space and coffee, and the groups provided community and conversation and steady sales. She also hosted author events. Some were local writers. Vermont had a surprisingly robust literary community. Others were touring authors whose publishers were willing to add a small-town stop to their schedules. The events were modest affairs, rarely drawing more than 30 or 40 people, but they were meaningful. Authors seemed to appreciate the intimate setting, and customers loved the access to writers they admired. Daniel's creative writing club started meeting at the shop monthly, as he'd suggested. 8 high school students would gather on Thursday evenings, sharing their work, poetry, short stories, the beginnings of novels. Margot would provide coffee and snacks and encouragement, marveling at their talent and earnestness. She began to understand what Daniel had meant about the importance of having a place like this, where young people could see that writing and reading were valued. As summer progressed into fall, Margot settled into life in Millbrook. She learned the rhythms of a small town, how everyone knew everyone else's business, both the burden and the comfort of that. She learned to love the sense of community, the way people looked out for each other. She learned to navigate the social dynamics, understanding that there were old families and new arrivals, generational tensions and alliances, all the complexity of human relationships playing out in a confined space. She also grew closer to Daniel. Their relationship developed slowly, naturally, without drama or urgency. They would have dinner once or twice a week, sometimes at Betty's Diner, sometimes at the new Thai restaurant that had opened in the next town, occasionally cooking together in Margot's apartment above the shop. They would spend Sunday afternoons hiking in the mountains or exploring nearby towns, always finding bookshops to visit and compare to the Willow Street bookshop. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Daniel told her one evening in September. They were sitting on the rocks beside a stream, eating sandwiches and watching the water flow past. The leaves were just beginning to turn, hints of red and gold among the green. Margot's heart skipped, but she wasn't surprised. She had been falling for him too, for his kindness and intelligence, his dry humor and quiet strength, the way he cared about his students and his community. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. They kissed there beside the stream, and Margot felt something click into place. Another piece of her life in Millbrook settling into its proper spot. But not everything was perfect. The shop was doing well, but not great. Sales were steady enough to cover expenses and pay Margot a modest salary. But there wasn't much cushion. She worried constantly about money, about unexpected expenses, about whether she could sustain this long term. The loan payments were manageable but not insignificant, and she was acutely aware that she was one major repair or slow season away from serious trouble. She also felt the isolation sometimes. Millbrook was wonderful, but it was small. There were no museums, no concerts, limited cultural offerings beyond what locals created for themselves. On quiet winter evenings, when business was slow and the darkness fell early, Margot would sometimes scroll through social media and see her old New York friends at gallery openings and theater performances and literary parties, and she would feel a pang of something like regret. Was she missing out? Had she traded one form of unhappiness for another? Had she given up too much for this quiet life? It was during one of these moments of doubt, on a cold evening in November, that she made a decision. She needed to know if this was really where she belonged, or if she was just hiding from a larger world that intimidated her. She called her old friend Keisha, who still worked at the literary agency in New York. They had kept in loose touch since Margot had left. "Keisha? It's Margot. I was wondering, are you guys hiring? For anything? Even an assistant position?" There was a pause. Then Keisha said carefully, "Actually, yes. My assistant just gave notice. But Margot, I thought you were running a bookshop in Vermont now. Don't you love it there?"
Ido.
I need to know if I'm here because I want to be, or because I'm afraid of anything else. "Come interview," Keisha said. "Worst case, you spend a weekend in the city and remember why you left. Best case, you have options." Margot flew to New York 3 weeks later, in early December. She stayed with Keisha, interviewed at the agency, met with her old colleagues for drinks. The interview went well. They offered her the position, better pay than her old job, more responsibility. It was everything she had wanted 5 years ago, and it filled her with dread. Walking through Manhattan, riding the subway, navigating the crowds and the noise and the constant frantic energy, Margot felt like she couldn't breathe. The city that had once excited her now felt oppressive, overwhelming, exhausting. The agency job that had been offered to her sounded like a prison sentence. On her last night, she and Keisha went to a bookstore reading. A famous author, a major publisher, hundreds of people crammed into a small space. It was exciting and impressive, but Margot found herself thinking about the readings at her shop. Tiny by comparison, maybe 20 people instead of 200, but intimate and real in a way this spectacle wasn't. "You're going back, aren't you?" Keisha said as they left the reading. "Yes, I can see it in your face. You're not meant for this anymore." "Was I ever?" Margot wondered aloud. "Maybe not. Maybe you just thought you were supposed to want this." Keisha hugged her. "Go home, Margot. Go back to your bookshop and your small town and whatever else you've found there. Some of us are meant for the big city, and some of us are meant for other things. Neither is better. They're just different." Margot flew back to Vermont the next day. When she drove into Millbrook and saw the mountains and the town and finally Willow Street, she felt a rush of relief and joy so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This was home. This was where she belonged. Daniel picked her up from the airport, and she kissed him before saying a word, there in the parking lot with people staring. "I love you," she said, "and I love Millbrook, and I'm never leaving." "I love you too," he replied, grinning, "and I'm very glad you're not leaving." That evening, Margot climbed to her apartment and pulled out Josephine's journals. She read the entry from December 1980, when Josephine had been offered a job at a university library, good pay, benefits, security. She had seriously considered it, had even gone for an interview. But in the end, she had stayed with the shop. She had written, "I could take the safe path, the sensible path. But sensible doesn't always mean right. I know who I am now, what I'm meant to do. I'm meant to be here, in this shop, with these books, serving this community. That knowledge is worth more than security or status or anyone else's idea of success. I choose this life deliberately, with open eyes and a full heart. Asterisk. Margot smiled and closed the journal. She pulled out a pen and her own notebook. She had started keeping a journal of her own, documenting the shop's rebirth, and wrote, asterisk, today I chose this life. Not because I'm running from something else, but because this is where I'm meant to be. In Josephine's shop in this town with Daniel and Mia and Betty and all the customers who have become friends. I'm building something meaningful here, something that matters. And that's enough. That's everything. Asterisk. Hashtag part 7. Winter and loss. Winter arrived in earnest in mid-December, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold. The shop's heating system, old but functional, worked overtime to keep the space warm. Margot kept the wood stove burning in the reading area, creating a cozy atmosphere that drew customers in from the cold. The holiday season was busy, people buying books as gifts, lingering over hot coffee, escaping the stress of shopping and family obligations. Margot created gift sets, themed collections she wrapped in brown paper and twine, books for travelers, cozy mystery lovers, young naturalists, the poetry collection. They sold surprisingly well. She also started a tradition of giving away books. On Christmas Eve, she stayed open late and invited anyone who couldn't afford to buy gifts to come in and choose one book, free, to give to someone they loved. It was Josephine's tradition. She learned from Betty, something she had done every year. She never advertised it, Betty told Margot. Just spread the word quietly to people who needed it. Some years she'd give away 50 books or more. She believed everyone deserved to give and receive stories, regardless of their circumstances. Margot was overwhelmed by the response. People came. Some she knew, some she didn't, and chose books with such care and gratitude that she found herself fighting tears all evening. A single mother picking out a picture book for her daughter. An elderly man on a fixed income choosing a cookbook for his wife. Teenagers selecting novels for younger siblings. Each person thanked her profusely, and Margot insisted the thanks belonged to Josephine, that she was just continuing what her great-aunt had started. After the shop closed on Christmas Eve, Daniel came by with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. They sat in the reading area, eating lo mein and egg rolls, watching the snow fall outside the windows. You made a lot of people happy tonight, Daniel said. Josephine made them happy. I just showed up. Don't diminish what you're doing, Daniel said gently. Yes, you're continuing Josephine's legacy, but you're also making it your own. You're building on what she started, adding your own ideas, your own generosity. That matters. They spent Christmas Day together, quiet and peaceful, cooking a simple meal and reading by the fire. It was the best Christmas Margot had experienced in years. No stress, no obligation, no pretense. Just quiet joy and good company. The new year arrived cold and bright. January and February were typically the slowest months for retail, and the shop was no exception. Some days, only a handful of customers came in. Margot used the quiet time to read, to reorganize sections of the shop, to plan events for spring. She also worked on the shop's finances, trying to find ways to increase revenue or cut costs without compromising what made the place special. It was during this quiet period that Mrs. Patterson died. Margot learned about it on a Wednesday morning when Betty called, her voice thick with tears. Helen Patterson passed away last night, peaceful in her sleep. Her daughter found her this morning. I thought you'd want to know. She loved coming to the shop so much. Margot felt grief hit her like a wave. Mrs. Patterson had been a constant presence since the reopening, always cheerful despite her arthritis and the walker she pushed, always eager to discuss her latest mystery novel. She had reminded Margot of Josephine, that same sharp intelligence, that same passion for stories. The funeral was on Saturday, well attended by what seemed like half the town. At the reception afterward, Mrs. Patterson's daughter approached Margot. "My mother left instructions," she said. "She wanted you to have her collection of first edition mysteries. She said you would know what to do with them." The collection was extensive and valuable, over 200 first editions, some quite rare. Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, Josephine Tay, Gao Marsh, Rex Stout. Books that had been loved and cherished and carefully preserved. Margot was overwhelmed. I can't accept something so valuable." She wanted you to have them. She said you understood what books meant, that you would find them good homes with readers who would appreciate them. Mrs. Patterson's daughter pressed Margot's hand. "Please, it's what she wanted." Margot created a special display in the shop, the Helen Patterson Memorial Mystery Collection. She priced the books fairly but not cheaply. These were treasures, not bargains. And when they sold, she donated 20% of the proceeds to the library in Mrs. Patterson's name. The gesture resonated with the town. Other people began bringing in books that had belonged to deceased relatives, asking Margot if she wanted them. She accepted them all, creating new memorial sections. It became a way for people to honor their loved ones, to ensure that the books they had treasured would continue to be read and valued. "You've turned the shop into a kind of living memorial," Daniel observed one evening. "A place where people's stories, both the ones they read and the ones they lived, continue." Winter slowly released its grip. The snow began to melt, revealing muddy ground and the first brave crocuses. The days grew longer, warmer, and with spring came new energy, new customers, new possibilities. ## Part 8, Growth and Change. Spring brought a surge of activity. Tourist season was beginning, with visitors driving through Vermont to see the covered bridges and mountain views. Many stopped at the bookshop, drawn by the sign or the window displays or mentions on social media. Margot had been building the shop's online presence steadily, posting regularly about new books, author events, local happenings. To her surprise, the accounts had grown significantly. Over 5,000 followers on Instagram, 3,000 on Facebook. People from all over the country followed along, charmed by the story of the small-town bookshop and the woman who had brought it back to life. Some of these online followers became customers, ordering books through the website and having them shipped. Margot hadn't expected this. Mail order seemed like a strange fit for a small indie bookshop, but it provided a valuable additional revenue stream, especially during slow winter months. She was shipping packages one April morning when a woman walked into the shop, 30-ish, professional-looking, with a leather briefcase and expensive shoes. "Are you Margot Chen?" the woman asked. "Yes. How can I help you?" "I'm Rachel Torres from Vermont Life magazine. We'd like to do a feature story about your shop, the renovation, the reopening, how you're preserving this literary landmark while modernizing it. Would you be interested?" The article appeared in the summer issue with beautiful photographs of the shop and a lengthy piece about Josephine, Margot, and the role of independent bookstores in small communities. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People drove from hours away to visit the shop featured in the magazine. Sales jumped significantly. Margot's social media following doubled, then tripled. It was exciting but also somewhat terrifying. Margot worried about losing the intimate, community-focused nature of the shop as it attracted more attention. She worried about turning it into a tourist attraction rather than a local gathering place. "You can be both," Betty counseled her over coffee one morning. "Tourists come and go, but the locals are your foundation. As long as you keep serving the community, keep hosting the book clubs and story times and events, keep being a place where people belong, you won't lose what makes this special." Margot took the advice to heart. She expanded her staff, hiring Frank, a retired English teacher who had encyclopedic knowledge of classic literature, to work part-time. With 3 employees, including Mia, she could stay open longer hours and take occasional days off, something she hadn't done since reopening. She also expanded the shop's offerings. She added a small selection of literary-themed gifts, bookmarks, tote bags, candles that smelled like old books. She partnered with local artists to sell their work, paintings, pottery, handmade journals. She started carrying greeting cards designed by a local illustrator. Each edition was carefully curated to fit the shop's aesthetic and values, but they provided additional revenue streams and gave customers more reasons to visit. The most significant change came in the form of a proposal from Daniel. They were hiking in the mountains on a Sunday in June, following a trail that led to a waterfall. The day was perfect. Warm sun, cool breeze, the forest alive with birdsong. When they reached the waterfall, Daniel pulled Margot into his arms and kissed her. "I love you," he said. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes. I want to spend my life with you, wake up with you every morning, fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life together, not just dating, but actually sharing everything. Will you marry me?" Margot felt joy flood through her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married in September, a small ceremony in the garden behind the bookshop. Betty catered, Mia helped decorate. It seemed like the whole town turned out to celebrate. Josephine's bookshop, which had been a refuge for Margot, became the site of one of the happiest days of her life. Daniel moved into the apartment above the shop, bringing his books and his clothes and his calm, steady presence. The space that had been lonely became a home filled with love and laughter and comfortable companionship. "Josephine would have liked this," Daniel said one evening as they sat together reading, their bodies comfortable against each other, the shop quiet below them. She would have been happy to know her legacy led to this. Margot thought about her great-aunt often, about the life she had lived alone, devoted to the shop and the community, about the loneliness that came through in her journals, the sadness of having no one to share her days with. Josephine had created something beautiful, but she had also paid a price for it. Margot was determined to have both the meaningful work and the love, the community and the partnership. It required balance and compromise and constant attention, but it was possible. She was proving it was possible. ## Part 9. Full circle. The bookshop's 2nd anniversary arrived in June, 2 years after Margot had first driven into Millbrook with everything she owned packed into a rental car. She planned a celebration, author readings, live music, special sales, coffee and cake. But the night before the event, sitting in the shop after closing, Margot felt overwhelmed by gratitude and wonder at how much had changed. She pulled out Josephine's journals and her own, reading passages from both, seeing the parallels and the differences. Josephine had written in 1978, *, "The shop is 2 years old today. 2 years of struggle and joy, of mistakes and lessons learned. I'm still not sure if I can make this work long-term, but I know I've created something worthwhile. People come here not just to buy books, but to connect with stories, with each other, with something larger than themselves. If I can keep this place alive, keep these connections happening, then my life will have meant something." Margot wrote in her own journal, *2 years ago, I arrived in Millbrook broken and lost, running from a failed life with no idea what came next. Josephine's gift, this shop, this opportunity, saved me. It gave me purpose, community, home. But I've also given back. I've brought new life to what she built, honored her legacy while making it my own. The shop is thriving. The town has embraced me. I found love and meaning and satisfaction I never knew was possible. Asterisk. Asterisk, I think about the person I was in New York. Anxious, unfulfilled, always feeling like I was falling short of some impossible standard. That person seems like a stranger now. Here, I'm enough. What I do matters. Who I am is valued. Asterisk. Asterisk, Josephine understood this. She knew that success isn't measured in money or status or achieving some external marker of accomplishment. It's measured in lives touched, connections made, beauty preserved and shared. By that measure, her life was incredibly successful. And I hope mine will be too. Asterisk. The anniversary celebration was joyful and well attended. Authors read, musicians played, customers old and new browsed and bought books. Margot stood behind the counter, Daniel beside her, Mia and Frank working the floor, and felt complete happiness. Susan Blackwell from the library gave a speech, talking about the importance of bookstores in preserving literary culture and community bonds. Betty told stories about Josephine that made people laugh and cry. Several customers shared testimonials about what the shop meant to them, how it had enriched their lives. And then Jim Morrison, the contractor who had helped renovate the building, presented Margot with a gift, a hand-carved wooden sign he had made himself. It read, "The Willow Street Bookshop, EST 1976, Josephine Chen, founder Margot Chen, proprietor stories continue here." Margot cried as Jim hung the sign behind the counter, where she would see it every day, a reminder of the legacy she carried and the story she was writing. That evening, after everyone had left and the shop was clean and quiet, Margot and Daniel stood at the door looking out at Willow Street. The trees were in full leaf, the garden was blooming, the mountains in the distance glowed in the sunset. "We should think about the future," Daniel said. "Long-term plans. What do you want this place to be in 5 years? 10 years?" Margot thought about this. "I want it to still be a gathering place, still be somewhere people feel welcome and valued. I want to keep hosting events, supporting local authors, connecting readers with books they'll love. Beyond that," she paused, "I don't need it to be huge or famous. I just want it to be sustainable and meaningful." "What about expansion?" Daniel asked. "You could open other locations, franchise the concept." Margot shook her head immediately.
No.
"That's not what this is about. Josephine ran one shop for 47 years, and that was enough. This is enough. One shop, done well, serving one community. That's the dream." Daniel smiled and pulled her close. "I love that about you. You know what matters." As summer turned to fall, Margot found herself thinking about legacy in new ways. She and Daniel had started talking about having children, about raising a family in Millbrook. The idea both excited and terrified her. How would she balance running the shop with being a mother? Could she do both well? She thought about Josephine, who had never had children, who had poured all her maternal energy into the shop and its customers. Was that sacrifice necessary? Or could Margot find a different way? ## Part 10. The challenge. The challenge came unexpectedly in October, in the form of a chain bookstore announcing plans to open a location in a new shopping center being built on the highway, just 10 miles from Millbrook. The news hit the town like a bomb. A chain bookstore with its massive inventory and deep discounts and corporate backing could destroy the Willow Street Bookshop. How could Margot compete with their prices, their selection, their marketing power? "Don't panic," Betty counseled over coffee. "Remember what you have that they don't. Personal service, community connection, curation. People don't come to your shop just to buy books. They come for the experience, for you." But Margot did panic. She spent sleepless nights running numbers, trying to figure out how much of a hit to sales she could absorb and still stay afloat. She looked at her loan balance, her monthly expenses, her thin profit margins. She had barely 2 years of savings built up. If business dropped significantly, she could be in serious trouble within months. The bookstore chain, Pages and More, opened in early November with massive fanfare. Grand opening sales, celebrity appearances, a coffee shop that put Noah's coffee bar to shame. Margot drove out to see it one day, her stomach churning with anxiety. It was huge, tens of thousands of square feet, hundreds of thousands of books, gleaming and new and impersonal. Customers wandered the aisles like lost souls, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of choices. No one greeted them by name. No one offered personal recommendations. It was a warehouse of books, efficient and soulless. And yet people went. Lots of people. Margot watched her sales drop by 20% in November, then 25% in December despite the holiday season. Regular customers apologized as they admitted they'd been shopping at Pages and More. The prices are just so much better, they'd say guiltily. Tourist traffic decreased too, with many visitors stopping at the chain store on their way into the mountains and never making it to Millbrook. By January, Margot was genuinely scared. She sat with Daniel and her financial records spread across the kitchen table, trying to figure out how to survive. "We could dip into our personal savings," Daniel offered. "I make a decent salary. We could keep the shop afloat for a while longer." "That's not sustainable," Margot said, her voice tight with stress. "I can't keep draining our resources for a failing business. Maybe I should just..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Close the shop. Give up. Admit defeat. "No," Daniel said firmly. "We're not there yet. You need to fight. Show people why your shop matters, why it's worth supporting even if it costs a little more." Margot knew he was right. She couldn't compete on price or selection, but she could compete on value, on experience, on connection. She needed to remind people what made the Willow Street Bookshop special. She started with a campaign on social media, but not a marketing campaign, a storytelling campaign. She asked customers to share their memories of the shop, their favorite book discoveries, their experiences with Josephine or with Margot herself. The response was overwhelming. People posted photos of themselves with books they'd bought at the shop. They shared stories about Josephine recommending the perfect book during a difficult time. They talked about book club meetings, author events, Saturday story times with their children. They described the feeling of walking into the shop on a cold day and being greeted by name, offered coffee, made to feel like they belonged. The stories painted a picture of a place that was about so much more than buying books. It was about community, connection, belonging. It was about relationships built over time, trust earned through countless small interactions, a space that made people feel valued and understood. Margot also doubled down on what made her shop unique. She started a subscription service, Books by Margot, where customers paid a monthly fee and received a hand-picked book selected specifically for them based on their tastes and preferences. It was labor-intensive, requiring her to really know each subscriber, but it created a personal connection that no chain store could replicate. She expanded the author events, bringing in more writers and hosting more frequent readings. She started offering writing workshops taught by Daniel and other local authors. She created a lending library of rare and expensive books that people could borrow for free, books too pricey for most people to buy, but valuable for researchers or serious readers. She also went grassroots, personally talking to every regular customer, asking for their loyalty and support. She was honest about the challenge the chain store posed, vulnerable about her fears, direct about what she needed. "I can't match their prices," she told people, "but I can promise you something they can't. I know you. I know what you like to read. I can help you discover books you'll love. I can create a space where you feel at home. That's worth something. At least I hope it is." Most people agreed it was worth something. Many committed to buying their books from Margot even if it cost a little more. Some started monthly donation subscriptions to support the shop without requiring anything in return. The community rallied in ways that moved Margot to tears. But it wasn't enough. Sales were still down, and Margot was still losing money each month. By March, she was facing a difficult decision: close the shop or take on more debt to keep it alive. It was Mia who came up with the idea that changed everything. "What if we go digital?" she suggested one afternoon. Not just the website and social media, but actually create digital content. Book reviews, author interviews, reading recommendations. We could start a podcast, build a YouTube channel, reach people beyond Millbrook. Margot was skeptical. "I don't know anything about podcasting or YouTube." "But I do," Mia said. "I've been creating content online since I was 12. Let me help." We could build a real audience, create another revenue stream through sponsorships and Patreon. And it would drive people to the shop. If they fall in love with your recommendations online, they'll want to visit in person or order from you online. They started small. Mia set up equipment in a corner of the shop, a decent microphone, some lighting, a camera. They recorded their first podcast episode on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The Willow Street Bookshop Podcast, Episode 1, Welcome to Our Story. Margot talked about Josephine, about inheriting the shop, about what made independent bookstores matter. She shared her current reading recommendations. She interviewed Daniel about teaching literature to teenagers. It was rough and unpolished, but it was authentic. Mia edited the episode and posted it along with a YouTube video. The response was modest but encouraging. A few hundred people listened. Some of them became new customers, ordering books through the website. They kept going, releasing episodes weekly. Margot interviewed local authors, talked with book club members, discussed controversial books, shared behind-the-scenes glimpses of running a small bookshop. Mia handled all the technical aspects, edited the episodes, managed the social media promotion. Slowly, the audience grew. 1,000 listeners, then 5,000, then 10,000. People from across the country discovered the podcast, charmed by Margot's passion and knowledge, by the authentic small-town feel, by the genuine love of books that came through in every episode. And crucially, many of these listeners became customers. They couldn't visit the shop in person, but they could order books online. The mail-order business, which had been a small sideline, became a significant revenue source. By summer, online sales were matching in-store sales. The podcast also attracted attention from publishers and authors. Margot started getting advance reader copies to review on the podcast. Authors asked to be interviewed. The shop's profile rose, bringing more tourists and more respect from the literary community. By September, a full year after Pages and More had opened, the Willow Street Bookshop was not just surviving but thriving. Sales had recovered and then exceeded previous levels. The combination of local community support, online audience building, and unique offerings that no chain could replicate had worked. Margot sat in the shop one evening after closing, looking at the financial reports with disbelief and relief. They had made it. They had survived the challenge and emerged stronger. "You did it," Daniel said, reading over her shoulder. "You saved the shop." "We did it," Margot corrected. "You, me, Mia, Frank, Betty, Susan, everyone in this town who refused to let it die. This place belongs to all of us." Hashtag part 11. Full circle. 3 years after the grand reopening, on a warm June evening, Margot stood in the shop preparing for a special event. Tomorrow was her 30th birthday, and Daniel had planned a surprise party that Margot had pretended not to know about. But tonight was for something else. Tonight, she was hosting a reading by a debut author, a young woman from Millbrook who had grown up coming to Josephine's shop. who had attended Margot's story times as a child, who had been part of Daniel's creative writing club as a teenager. Emma Harrison's first novel was being published by a small press, and Margot had convinced them to let the launch happen at the Willow Street Bookshop. Felt right, circular, meaningful. A girl who had been nurtured by this place was now giving back, sharing her own story. Emma arrived early, nervous and excited, clutching a box of her brand new books. "I can't believe this is happening," she kept saying. "I can't believe I wrote a book. I can't believe people are going to read it." "Believe it," Margot said warmly. "You worked hard for this. You earned this." The shop filled with people. Emma's family and friends, Daniel's students past and present, book club members, regular customers, curious neighbors. 50 people crammed into the space, sitting in every available chair and standing along the walls. Emma read from her novel, a story about a girl in a small town who discovers magic in an old bookshop. The parallels to the Willow Street Bookshop were obvious and intentional. Emma read beautifully, her voice strong and clear, and when she finished, the applause was thunderous. During the Q&A afterward, someone asked Emma about her inspiration. "This shop saved me," Emma said simply, "when I was going through a really hard time in middle school. Bullying, depression, feeling like I didn't fit anywhere. This place became my refuge. Josephine, and then Margot, gave me books that showed me I wasn't alone. They created a space where I felt safe and valued. And they showed me that stories matter, that art matters, that there's magic in the everyday if you know how to look for it. This book exists because this shop existed. I hope someday I can pass that gift on to someone else." Margot had to excuse herself to the back room because she was crying too hard to hide it. Daniel found her there a few minutes later. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I'm better than okay. She struggled for words. "This is why we do this. This is the whole point. We give people books and they go out and create more books, more art, more beauty. It's an endless cycle of creation and inspiration. And we get to be part of it." Daniel pulled her into a hug. "Josephine would be so proud of you." "I hope so. I really hope so." That night, after everyone had left and the shop was quiet, Margot did something she hadn't done in a while. She climbed to the apartment and pulled out Josephine's journals, reading through them from beginning to end. She saw the full arc of her Greytant's life, the grief and determination of the early years, the joy and struggle of building something meaningful, the satisfaction of seeing it flourish, the sadness of decline, and finally, the peaceful acceptance of ending. And she saw herself in those pages, saw the same patterns, the same emotions, the same dedication to something larger than herself. But she also saw differences. Where Josephine had been alone, Margot had Daniel. Where Josephine had sacrificed personal happiness for the shop, Margot was finding ways to have both. Where Josephine's story had ended with loneliness and loss, Margot's story was still being written, and it was a story of connection and love and community. She pulled out her own journal and began to write. Tonight I watched Emma Harrison launch her first novel in this shop. She's 22 years old, full of talent and hope and dreams. She's the future, not just of literature, but of this shop, this community, this endless chain of storytelling that connects us all. I've been running the Willow Street Bookshop for 3 years now. In that time, I've learned so much about books, about business, about community, about myself. I've learned that success isn't measured in money or recognition, but in lives touched, connections made, beauty preserved and shared. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can build something meaningful, that I can honor a legacy while making it my own. Most importantly, I've learned that I'm home, not just in Millbrook, not just in this building, but in this life I've created. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. Asterisk. Asterisk Josephine wrote once that a bookshop is a sanctuary, a meeting place, a gateway to other worlds. She was right, but it's also more than that. It's a living thing, constantly evolving, shaped by everyone who enters it. It's a story that never ends, because every book sold starts a new chapter in someone's life. Asterisk. Asterisk, I don't know what the future holds. Whether I'll run this shop for 5 more years or 50. Whether we'll have children who grow up among these shelves, or whether the shop will eventually pass to someone else. But I know that for now, for today, I'm living the life I was meant to live. Asterisk. Asterisk, thank you, Josephine, for this gift. Thank you for showing me what matters. Thank you for saving me, even though you never knew you would. Asterisk. Asterisk, the story continues. Asterisk. Margot closed the journal and went to bed, sleeping peacefully beside Daniel, dreaming of books and stories and all the lives still waiting to be changed by the right words at the right time. ## epilogue. 5 years later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Willow Street bookshop, illuminating the shelves that Margot now knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. She moved through the space with practiced ease, straightening books, preparing the coffee bar, getting ready for another day. So much had changed in 5 years, and yet the shop remained essentially the same. A place of stories and connections, a sanctuary for readers, a gathering place for the community. The biggest change was sleeping upstairs. Lily Chun Mercer, 3 years old, who would wake soon demanding pancakes and stories. Becoming a mother had transformed Margot in ways she couldn't have anticipated, had made her more patient and more anxious, more tired and more alive. She had worried about balancing motherhood with running the shop, but the two had merged more naturally than she'd expected. Lily was growing up among books the way some children grew up on farms or in cities. She knew the shop's rhythms, its customers, its stories. At 3, she could already recognize dozens of book covers and would often pull books from lower shelves, insisting they were perfect for Mrs. Patterson. Named after the original Mrs. Patterson, though she'd never met her, or Daniel's students, or coffee people. Mia was in college now, studying marketing and business, but she still worked at the shop during summers and breaks. The podcast she had started was still going strong, now with over 50,000 regular listeners. She had brought on guest hosts, expanded to video content, even secured sponsorships from publishers and literary organizations. The income from the digital side of the business now rivaled the physical shop's revenue. Frank had retired fully, replaced by 2 new part-time employees. A recent college graduate who loved young adult literature, and a woman in her 60s who had moved to Millbrook specifically because of the bookshop, having discovered it through the podcast. The shop itself had evolved in small ways. The coffee bar had expanded slightly. There were now 2 reading nooks instead of 1. Margot had added a small used book section where customers could trade in their old books for credit, a popular feature that kept inventory fresh and prices accessible. But the core remained unchanged. Careful curation, personal service, community connection. Every customer was still greeted by name. Recommendations were still thoughtful and personalized. Events were still regular and well-attended. The shop was still a place where people felt they belonged. Daniel came down the stairs, carrying a sleepy Lily. "Someone wants to see Mama," he said. Margot took her daughter, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling the solid weight of her small body. "Good morning, little love. Ready for pancakes." They ate breakfast together in the shop, a family ritual they'd maintained since Lily was born. Daniel would head to school, Lily would go to the small daycare 2 blocks away, and Margot would open the shop. In the afternoon, Lily would come back to spend time among the books, playing quietly or helping Margot by shelving board books in the children's section. At 9 o'clock, Margot unlocked the door and flipped the sign to open. The first customer of the day was already waiting, a regular, a man who came in every Monday for his weekly book purchase. "Morning, Margot. What do you have for me today?" She knew exactly what he needed. She had set aside a thriller by a new author, fast-paced and clever, exactly his taste. He took it gratefully, chatted for a few minutes about last week's selection, bought his book and a coffee, and left with promises to return next Monday. This was the work. Day after day, book after book, customer after customer. It was simple and profound, ordinary and extraordinary. It was exactly what Josephine had done for 47 years, what Margot had been doing for 8 years now, what someone hopefully would continue doing for decades to come. The morning passed in its familiar rhythm. Customers browsed and bought, asked for recommendations, lingered over coffee. The UPS driver delivered boxes of new books that Margot would unpack later. Betty stopped by for her daily coffee and chat. Susan Blackwell called to confirm arrangements for next week's author event. At lunchtime, Margot took a break and pulled out her journal. She wrote, *8 years ago, I received a letter that changed my life. A letter telling me I had inherited a bookshop from a great aunt I barely knew. I was lost then, broken, running from a failed life with no idea where I was going. Asterisk if someone had told me then where I'd be now. Married, a mother, running a successful bookshop in a small Vermont town. I wouldn't have believed them. This life seemed impossible, unattainable, belonging to someone else. Asterisk, but here I am. Here we are, living the impossible life, making it real through daily choices and constant effort and deep commitment to something that matters. Asterisk Josephine's gift wasn't just the shop or the building or the money. It was the possibility, the chance to start over, to build something meaningful, to find out who I really was beneath all the expectations and failures and fears. Asterisk, I think about her often. This woman I barely knew but who shaped my life so profoundly. I wish I could thank her. I wish I could tell her that her legacy lives on, that the story she started continues, that the shop she loved is thriving. Asterisk, but maybe she knows. Maybe somewhere, somehow, she can see what's become of her life's work. I hope so. I really hope so. Asterisk, the shop is full today. Customers browsing, children reading in the corner. The smell of coffee and old books filling the air. Lily is at daycare, learning and playing and growing. Daniel is teaching, inspiring the next generation of readers and writers. Mia is in class, building her future while staying connected to this place that shaped her. Asterisk, and I'm here doing what I was meant to do. Selling books, yes, but also creating community, facilitating connections, keeping stories alive and moving through the world. Asterisk, this is enough. This is everything. Asterisk, the story continues. Asterisk, Margot closed her journal and returned to work. There were books to shelve, customers to serve, stories to share. The afternoon stretched ahead, full of possibility and promise, ordinary and miraculous all at once. Outside the window, Willow Street dozed in the summer sun. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. Mountains rose in the distance, ancient and unchanging. And inside the Willow Street bookshop, stories waited on every shelf, ready to change lives, to offer comfort, to spark imagination, to remind readers of what it meant to be human. The door chimed as another customer entered. Margot looked up with a smile, ready to help them find exactly what they needed, to continue the work Josephine had started so many years ago, the work of keeping the gateway open, the work of sharing stories, The work of building community, one book, one reader, one connection at a time. The story continued. It always would. The end.